The Rise of the Necrons. When the Silent King saw what had been done, he knew at last the true nature of the Catan and of the doom they had wrought in his name. An excerpt from the Book of Mournful Night. Armed with weapons of god-like power and starships that could cross the galaxy in the blink of an eye through the use of quantum phase technology, the Necrontyr stood ready to begin their war against the Old Ones anew. But the Catan had another gift for their mortal subjects. They offer them a path to immortality and the physical stability their species had always craved. Their diseased flesh would be replaced with the living metal of necrodermis that made up their star god's own physical forms. Their discarded organic husks would be consumed, and their cold metal forms would then be free to pursue their great vengeance against the Old Ones and the rest of the hateful universe, freed forever from the weaknesses of their hated flesh. With their pact sealed, the star gods revealed the form that immortality would take for the Necrontyr, and the great biotransference process began. Colossal bio-furnaces built by Necrontyr artifice at the direction of the Catan roared day and night, consuming weak-bodied flesh and replacing it with enduring machine forms of living metal, much like the Catan themselves. As the Cyclopean machines clamored, they swarmed about the biotransference sites, drinking in the torrent of cast-off life energy and growing ever stronger. Whether the Necrontyr actually realized the price they would actually pay for accepting this pact is not known. The immortality the star gods promised would be delivered unto them by way of the arcane and terrible process of biotransference. Vast bio-foundries were constructed, and into these the Silent King's peoples marched according to the terms of the pact he had made with them. What blasphemous procedures the Necrontyr was subjected to within the raging bio-furnaces cannot be known, but certainly each was stripped of flesh and of soul, their body replaced by a shell of living metal animated by what remained of their guttering self. Above each furnace swooped and dove the ethereal true forms of the Catan as they glutted themselves on the spiritual and electromagnetic detritus of an entire species. It was only when the Silent King himself emerged from the biotransference process and looked upon what had become of his people that he saw the awful truth of the pact he had made. Though immortality and nigh godlike strength and vigor were his, it had come at the cost of his soul, the effluvial remains of which had already been sucked down the gullet of a circling Catan. As Jarek watched them feast on the life essence of his people, he realized the terrible depth of his mistake. In many ways, he felt better than he had in decades. the countless eggs and uncertainties of organic life now behind him. His new machine body was far mightier than the frail form he had tolerated for so long, and his thoughts were swifter and clearer than they had ever been. Yet there was an emptiness gnawing at his mind, an inexpressible hollowness of spirit that defied rational explanation. In that moment, he knew with cold certainty that the price of physical immortality had been the loss of his soul. With great sorrow, the Silent King beheld the fate he had brought upon his people. The Necrontyr were now but a memory, and the soulless, undying Necrons had been reborn in their place. Yet, if the price had been steep, Biotransference had fulfilled all of the promises that the Catan had made. Even the lowliest of the Necrontyr was now blessed with immortality. Age and hard ionizing radiation could little erode their new mechanical bodies, and only the most terrible of injuries could destroy them utterly. Likewise, the Necrons now enjoyed a unity that the Necrontyr had never known, though it was achieved through tyranny and the complete loss of individuality and emotion rather than by consent. The biotransference process had embedded command protocols in every Necron mind, granting Jarek the unswerving loyalty of his subjects. At first, the Silent King embraced this unanimity, for it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos that had consumed his empire in recent years. However, as time wore on, he grew weary of his burden, but dared not sever the command protocols, lest his subjects turn on him, seeking vengeance for the terrible curse he had visited upon them. And thus they became the Necrons, cursed to the eternal servitude of their star gods. The Catan feasted upon the entire Necrontyr race's life energies even as they made the biotransfers, leaving behind only the ghostly echoes of their consciousnesses. Only a few of the most strong-willed of them retained their intellect and self-awareness, and even they were but shadows of their former selves. They had been purged of so much of what had made them unique individuals, but unlike the Silent King, most of the Necrons at first cared not at all for their loss. All that mattered to them was that they would live forever without disease or death, as their star gods had promised. Nevertheless, their species was as united as ever. The process imbued in every one of the Silent King's subjects the command protocols with which he would rule over them with an iron hand. The entire species was his to command, and so it fell upon the Necrons to honor their side of their terrible bargain. Renewed by their devouring of the souls of an entire species, the Catan were unstoppable, and with the legions of the Necrons marching in their wake, the Old Ones were doomed. Only one thing truly remained of the old Necrontyr: their burning hatred for all the other living, intelligent species of the universe. Legions of the undying, living metal warriors set out into the galaxy in their tomb ships, and the stars burned in their wake. The Old One's mastery of the warp was now countered by the C'tan's supremacy over the physical universe, and the ancient enemies of the Necrons suffered greatly in the interstellar slaughter that followed. Necrons Ascendant. With the C'tan and the Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necrontyr, the empowered C'tan were nigh unstoppable and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were razed, suns extinguished, and whole star systems devoured by black holes called into being by the reality-warping powers of the star gods. Necron legions finally breach the webway and assail the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones' many allies amongst the younger intelligent species of the galaxy, harvesting the life force of the defenders to feed their voracious C'tan masters. In the closing years of the War in Heaven, one of the primary factors that led to the Necrons' ascendancy was their ability to finally gain access to the Old One's webway. The C'tan, known as Niadrajath, the Burning One, had long desired to carry his eldritch fires into that space beyond space, and so showed them how to breach its boundaries. Through a series of living stone portals known as the Dolmen Gates, the Necrons were finally able to turn the Old Ones' greatest weapon against them, vastly accelerating the ultimate end of the War in Heaven. The portals offered by the Dolmen Gates are neither so stable nor so controllable as the naturally occurring entrances to the webway scattered across the galaxy. Indeed, in some curious fashion, the webway can detect when its environs have been breached by a Dolmen Gate, and its arcane mechanisms swiftly attempt to seal off the infected spur from the rest of the labyrinth dimension until the danger to its integrity has passed. Thus, Necrons entering the webway must reach their intended destination through its shifting extra-dimensional corridors quickly, lest the network itself bring about their destruction. Of course, in the present age, eons have passed since the Necrons used the Dolmen Gates to assault their arch-enemies. The Old Ones are gone, and the webway itself has become a tangled and broken labyrinth. Many Dolmen Gates were lost or abandoned during the time of the Necrons' Great Sleep, and many more were destroyed by the Eldari, the Old Ones' successors, as the guardians of the webway. Those that remain grant access to but a small portion of the immense maze that is the webway, much of that voluntarily sealed off by the Eldari to prevent further contamination. Yet the webway is immeasurably vast, and even these sundered skins allow the Necrons a mode of travel that far outpaces those of the younger races. It is well that this is so. As a species bereft of psychers as a result of the loss of their souls during the biotransference process, they are also incapable of warp travel, and without access to the webway, they would be forced to rely once more on slow voyaging stasis ships, dooming them to interstellar isolation. In the wake of these victories, the C'tan and their undying servants now dominated the galaxy. The last planetary bastions of the Old Ones were besieged, and the intelligent species they had once nurtured became cattle for the obscene hunger of the star gods. To the younger sentient species of the galaxy, the Necrons and their masters were cruel, callously harvesting their populations at will to feed their ceaseless hunger. The C'tan were figures of terror who demanded their adoration and fear in equal measure. For unknown reasons, but probably because their individual hungers for mortal life energies knew no bounds, the C'tan ultimately began to fight amongst themselves, for both sport and out of spite, as they unleashed destructive forces beyond mortal comprehension. Among the Eldari, an ancient myth holds that their laughing god tricked the star god known as the Outsider into turning on its brothers and beginning their long war for ascendancy. In the course of their struggle against one another, whole planets were razed, stars were extinguished, and whole solar systems were devoured by unleashed black holes. New cities were built by the efforts of millions, and then smashed down once more. As the red harvests of the C'tan and their Necron servants grew thin, star gods eventually devoured themselves, until only a few were left in the universe, and they competed amongst themselves for a long, long time. Eventually, even the Old Ones, who had once been defined by their patience and unstoppable will, became desperate in the face of the Necron assault. They used their great scientific skills to genetically engineer intelligent beings with an even stronger psychic link to the warp, hoping to create servants with the capability of channeling psychic power to defend themselves. They nurtured many potential warrior species, among which are believed to be the earliest members of the Eldari species and many other Xenos races, including the Rashan, the Kanib, the Krog, and many others. Millennia passed as the Old Ones' creations and experiments finally bore fruit, even as the C'tan and their Necron servants continued to extinguish life across the galaxy. The tide turns. The Old Ones' psychically empowered servant species spread across the galaxy, battling the advanced Necron technology with the psychic power of their warp-spawn sorcery. Facing this new onslaught, the C'tan's empire was shattered, as the psychic forces of the Imperium were anathema to soulless entities whose existence was wholly contained within purely physical patterns of electromagnetic force. For all the destruction they could unleash, they were unable to stop the Old Ones and the younger races' relentless advance across the stars. The Star Gods, unified by this great threat for the first time in millions of Terran years, sought a way to defeat the soul-fueled energies of the younger species. They initiated a great warding, a plan to forever defeat the psychic sorceries of the Old Ones by sealing off the material universe from the warp. A plan whose fruits could once be found on the Imperial fortress world of Cadia, in the form of the great pylons that litter the surface of that world in intricate networks and create the area of space-time stability near the Eye of Terror known as the Cadian Gate. With their god-like powers, it was only a matter of time until the C'tan succeeded and their greatest work began. But before it was complete, the seeds of destruction the Old Ones had planted millennia before brought about an unforeseen cataclysm. The growing pains and collective psychic flaws of the younger species threw the untapped, psychically reactive energies of the Imperium into disorder. War, pain, and destruction were mirrored in the bottomless depth of the sea of souls that was the warp. The maelstrom of souls unleashed into the Imperium by the carnage of the war in heaven coalesced in the previously formless energies of the warp. Older entities that had existed within the Imperium transformed into terrifying psychic predators, tearing at the souls of vulnerable psychers as their own environment was torn apart and reforged into the realm of chaos.